if you really want to get the benefits of DEI, it's really important that you work to make sure that the people you're inviting into the space feel they belong, feel they can thrive, feel that they won't get 911 called on them when they're coming over. And that is really when you see the benefit of DEI.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I know that there will still be some people trickling in, but we are going to begin. And I know we have some people online, so welcome. My name is Yemisi Olarantola Coates, and I am GBH Chief Inclusion and Equity Officer. And to all the mothers in every shape and form, I wish you a happy Mother's Day. So thank you for joining us in the room and on the Zoom for our discussion tonight on moving DEI from intention to impact with Malia Lazu. Malia Lazu is an award-winning, tenured strategist in diversity and inclusion and has sparked deep economic development and investment in urban entrepreneurship for over 20 years. She is also a lecturer in the Ties Group at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and so much more. I mean, her bio is quite impressive. I suggest that you go on LinkedIn to learn more about her bio and also get her book, which I will talk about. And today we will be discussing her book, From Intention to Impact, a practical guide to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, it is wonderful to meet you. This is going to be an interesting discussion. I told her she has a lot of energy. I need some of that.
Yes. Sis, I'm passing it on right now as we speak.
Thank you. Well, I also want to share thank you to those who sent in questions prior. So I incorporated some of the people in the audience. But I want to start today. You once mentioned when we spoke in our session a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that providing access to a space and promoting inclusion in that space are separate efforts. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what a successful incorporation of DEI principles look like and the common pitfalls you see corporations making along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's so great to be here, and thank you, all of you. Some of you may not know we had to reschedule this event, so I've been looking forward to having this conversation with Yemsi for several weeks now. I actually had a chance to meet her daughter before I met her out in Western Mass at an event I was doing, so I'm very excited for this conversation. But the difference between being invited and belonging is the difference between a successful DEI effort and a waste of time. And so I think often people think inviting people into the space is enough, right? We're going to invite you, we're going to have, and therefore I have done diversity, equity, and inclusion. But as we see with especially the recent spate of 911 calls, right, on Black students at Yale, at MIT, I think even, right? I don't want to dog others. I'm sure, MIT has their own issues with it. We saw that you can be invited into a space and still not belong. And so if you really want to get the benefits of DEI, it's really important that you work to make sure that the people you're inviting into the space feel they belong, feel they can thrive, feel that they won't get 911 called on them when they're coming over. And that is really when you see the benefit of DEI. And then you asked about the pitfalls of DEI. And, in my book, I have the 7 stages from intention to impact. And the first 3 stages are the honeymoon phase, right? You sign a pledge. You're like, yay, we did so good. You do a training. You're like, oh, we've learned. And then you take action on low-hanging fruit. So you're like, we're going to make a hire. Let's make that person diverse. And then you're like, okay, is it going to be a lady? Is it going to be a person of color? Is it going to be LGBTQ? Could it be all of those things, right? You start getting excited about diversity. And then you start feeling the pushback. right? So then maybe someone says, well, are we going to hire less qualified people because we're trying to hire the ladies? Right? Are we going to hire less qualified people? If there's two people, right, and one is less qualified, and you're like, well, then how do they get to final round if one is less qualified, right? But the questions that are asked are a sign that the culture is pushing back, and that's where we enter the 3 stages of pushback. And I think that is the biggest barrier, is that companies actually don't understand that the pushback that's happening in their culture is the bias. It's not the well-intentioned devil's advocates. It's bias. And to legitimize that work is going to slow your work down, right? Like, you know, when I was first writing this book, and in the intro of this book, I talk about a lot of businesses. You know, Johnson & Johnson, you know, I mean, just big, you know, large businesses that try. And I had to be really clear in this book, like, none of these folks get a gold star from me, right? Like, but there's areas of them trying. You know, but as my mom used to say, shout out, my mom's watching on Zoom. Happy Mother's Day, Mama, I love you. You know, you don't get credit for stuff you're supposed to do, right? So to want credit because, you know, you did a training so you could be nicer to the ladies, you know, I can't give that too much credit, right? But that is the biggest barrier, is that companies don't actually understand how to deal with the pushback, so they just stop.
Well, you mentioned the 3 common pushback that you write in your book. Can you describe what those 3 are?
Absolutely. So I like to call the first step of pushback the devil's advocates, right? Things like, oh, well, I have to see if we can get this through compliance, right? Are there lady engineers? How do we find them, right? Like, and it seems like innocuous. So you entertain it. Right, and then you go into the 5th stage, right, or the 2nd stage of pushback, which is realizing that this pushback actually isn't in good faith, right? So you answer the pushback. Well, this is how we can get it through compliance, and then another problem comes up, right? And soon you realize, like, oh, okay, wait, they're pushing back on me, and the 2nd phase of that pushback is realizing this isn't legitimate pushback. That this is actually biased culture, slowing the process down, doing all deliberate speed. Oh, the budgets, I just don't know if we can right now, right? When if you believe that diverse teams were 39% more profitable, you'd be doubling down on them right now, right? If you believe that you needed more than straight white men to enter a global economy, you'd be doubling down on the U.S.'s diversity right now, right? So, you know, you don't wholly, we obviously don't buy it. And then the 3rd stage of pushback is admitting that pushback is racism, is sexism, right? So it's one thing to be like, oh, wait, this isn't legitimate pushback. It's another thing to be like, you're pushing back because you're homophobic. You're pushing back because you're racist. You're pushing back because you're sexist. And as someone who has to get business leaders to want to work with me, right, in order for me to get paid, that's hard to do, right? It's much easier to be like, yay, you did a training. Oh my God, you're so good. But again, shout out to my mom. I wasn't raised that way.
Oh, I love it. And you said something, and this is an audience question. You mentioned profit. So I thought this is a great audience question. It says, I have seen studies, which you mentioned, that show DEI firms are more profitable on average than other firms. Does your experience tell you that following DEI practices results in higher profitability, or does higher profitability allow for a more robust DEI program?
You know, I think yes, right? Like both and, right? Because it is, and it makes sense on its face, right? That diverse people will come up with stronger ideas, stronger strategies, and be able to respond more robustly, right? I mean, that just makes sense when you think about what diversity does, to a room. And so I think that we now know, right? And these are McKinsey studies,
Yes,
right? These
that's
are Deloitte
correct.
studies,
Deloitte
right?
studies, that's
These
correct.
aren't the NAACP. This isn't the National Organization of Women,
That's
right?
correct.
These are business.
Business, that's correct.
Most of these companies who are slow to come to DEI probably are paying Deloitte and McKinsey a lot of money to get their advice, right?
Yes.
So, this is a trusted source saying this. And I think that whether it's true or not is not the problem that we're dealing with. The problem that we're dealing with is, do they believe it? Right? And I think that's the part where we fall down. At my classes at MIT, I tell my students, you can get an easy A with me. You never have to do an ounce of work. You just have to do one thing. Show me a legitimate study that's not eugenics that shows that a room full of straight white men is more effective, more profitable, more beneficial than a diverse room. I have yet to give that A. Because it doesn't exist. There's actually not a study that's like, rooms full of straight men are just teeming with innovations, right? That's it's hard to innovate from an established place when that's what you are, right? And so I think while it makes common sense, it's really hard for men in power and maybe some women in power who uphold a patriarchy to think that we made all this money with Steve and John and Tad, let's keep making money with them, right? And so that's the rub, right? Because I think if this was a widget and you were to say, this widget helps you enter markets 70% more successfully, I'd be sitting with Oprah right now, right? I bet the widget would be sold out, right? But because it actually takes an internal conversation, that's where people start saying, well, we're making enough money. How much more would I make if Mary is in charge?
And so leading into that, in terms of the conversation, in our conversation, you mentioned something that kind of pivots to what you're talking about. It was really poignant. I knew this, but when you hear it out loud, it hits you a little bit differently. You said that the U.S. had 60 years of having modern civil rights movement, but 360 years of not having. So if you think about it, 60 years of modern civil rights, but 360 years of not having it. And so when we think, and that hit me when you hear that number. And so in recent news, we've seen companies backtrack their commitments by cutting their DI funding, eliminating departments altogether, right? And so while pushing back on diversity is not new, it's nothing new, it does become hard to ignore, right? The most recent wave of relentless attacks in some states on many of the initiatives. And so this is a stark contrast to what happened in 2020 with George Floyd, where everybody was all in. So my question is that, it takes so many years, even for the root of change to sprout. So when it comes to DEI, what would you say to those companies right now falling into hard times and thinking of the areas where they can tighten their wallets? So what would you say to them?
Don't make your kids have to spend their inheritance on cleaning up your name. Ask the Vanderbilts. They had to spend a lot of money to have people forget that they shot workers during a strike. Right? We forget that now, but they had to spend a lot of money to have us forget that. This idea that our freedom is inevitable is why I talk about that stat in that way, because our freedom is anything but inevitable. Right? The United States inspired Hitler and South African apartheid, right? That's what we've inspired across the globe. We also love to say, our Constitution inspired, South Africa's Constitution. I wish we had that, right? Their Constitution have a lot more rights than our Constitution does. But our story centers us, right? Our story centers us. And so, for people who think that they can ignore this and somehow the United States will remain an empire, I think that's short-sighted, and that's why you shouldn't do it. But secondly, the world is not changing, it's already changed. And this idea that the lion is, is going to be able to walk away unscathed is just not true, right? And I talk a lot about in my book that these younger generations, I mean, they are willing to take pay cuts to work for people who align with their values. From Gen X and older, none of us feel that way. Right? But these younger folks, and I see it when we do discovery groups in these large corporations. I mean, you'll have folks be like, I can DoorDash, and equating DoorDash with a career, because for them, why am I going to stay locked in on this, right? So, you spoke about these 360 and these 60 years, and I mean, we could start a new slice from a couple years ago, right? Because women don't have the same rights that they got in the civil rights movement, right? So we're actually now starting a new moment of a new kind of rights for women that are atrophied, right? Are not there. And so at the end of the day, we can either make this hard or we can be a part of being on the right side of history. And I think it is hard because, I said this quote the other day in this interview, but folks who used to be meatheads, and if you get this reference, it's because you're supposed to get this reference. People who used to be meatheads are now realizing that they're Archie. And that's hard. That's hard because you used to have it right. And now you're a little too buttoned up. And that history is going to notice that. So, how do you want to be talked about? How do you want your children to be talked about? How do you want your company to actually be competitive in the 21st century? You're going to need DEI to do it.
Great. That's a great comment. And there's a follow-up question to that. In addition to the pushback on DEI, one of the things that I do not see explained is who has been the real beneficiary of such efforts. Why do you think it is not often discussed? And how come we have not seen as much discussion openly from that group in fighting against the backlash? So who is that group?
You mean who
have benefited from DEI?
Well, I mean, if we look at, if we look at the history of when it was called affirmative action, right, and how it moved forward to DEI, right, we see that the biggest beneficiaries are white women, right? Some of the biggest beneficiaries in affirmative action, right, and continue to be. I mean, and I can tell you sometimes it is, sometimes it's hard to see how many white women run DEI for a company, right? Or for, and again, all these shout outs to my mama, she's white, y'all. So like, I'm like, I have no problem with the dope ones. But shout out, some of them are in this audience right now. But I think it's really important to remember that there is a privilege there, right? And that when you're asking to move a needle, you can become a really great excuse or really great proof that needle is moving. And, I wasn't able to put it in my book, but I love that Bill Burr quote. If anyone has seen Bill Burr, does a great talk about white women, and he calls it the white privilege of oppression. And he's like, I hear white women say like, it's so tough for me, it's so tough. And then he goes, he does this much better, right? I'm paraphrasing a great comedian. And he says, I don't know, is it that hard for you? Let's talk about it in the hot tub, right? Every white male that might be getting in our way, 100% of the time has had a white woman raising them, right? Has had a white mother. And so I think that responsibility is important for white women to look at. And I think it also makes it hard for them. How do you hold your sons and your husbands and your fathers accountable? I think that's hard for people to do. I mean, I think it's hard for any one of us, to do. So, they become the beneficiaries, and then, I think they convince themselves that they're doing, they're doing as much as they can.
Well, that leads to this audience question around doing as much as they can. It says, how do companies move away from a culture of pseudo-harmony? Which I find that to be interesting. Combination.
Faux harmony.
I find that interesting. Where collaboration and politeness can render voices to fall silent of having the real and uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah. So within a workplace, I think it's important to remember that, like, it's faux, right? I mean, we're all coming to work with people that we might not choose to be around. I mean, they're probably all great people, right? But you wouldn't necessarily pick them to hang out 8 hours a day. And there's an important about that politeness, right? There's something important there. But that can't make you complicit, right? It can't make you actually ignore harm. And so I think it is really important for people to challenge or question inauthenticity, right? And I work with my clients a lot to sit in our hypocrisy. I mean, I have told CEOs, like, you just whited horribly bad, and we're going to sit in your whiteness right now. And we're going to sit in it, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. But we have to do that, right? We have to recognize that this isn't working because the women aren't getting it, or the Black people aren't getting it, or the LGBTQ community. This isn't working because you're not getting it, right? And I think that understanding that inauthenticity, being FOS, right? Having, I talk in my book about cover your ass, which is a term I didn't hear till I got into corporate America. Because I come from organizing. You can't cover your ass. No one will trust you.
Right, that is true.
Right? Like, you got to be accountable.
You got to be accountable.
Right? You can't say, oh, well, it didn't work because, right? No. So it wasn't until I got in corporate America and they just say it they're just covering it. Well, you can't do that, y'all, right? Like, covering your ass for my freedom, that's harsh. So having those conversations and not necessarily to accuse, because I do think a lot of people try their best with, the limited knowledge that this country affords them when it comes to diversity. But recognize, okay, you are making this decision because your mission to your business is outriding your public mission, right? And let's just say that. Right? Because your employees are saying it anyway. So let's just say that, right? You're not doing it because of another reason. You're doing it really because you see DEI as a cost center. And you're going to cut that out of HR. That's why you're doing it, because it's a cost center. So say that. And not that you even have to say it to anyone publicly, but we're going to say it, right? We're going to say it. And I think when you're within a group, that's almost easier to have those types of internal, do we mean it, do we not mean it conversations.
No, that's very interesting, because how I took that question, I thought it was like New England nice. That's what I heard, when I moved here.
New England nice, Midwest nice. I mean, we're just conflict avoidant people.
Yes, and coming from Florida, because I came from Cape Coral, Fort Myers, Southwest Florida, very blunt. Very direct. Like, you don't have to figure it out. It's in your face. And to me, that is more dealable for me. Like, I can deal with that because that's being honest.
Right.
Right? So you're talking about
for
honest.
Your safety, right? I think,
that's correct.
I think we forget that the reason why we care is because we have to know if we're safe or not.
That is
right?
correct.
Like, we're not just doing this because it's like,
Correct.
right? Like, if you, this is why I love going to Northampton. Like, the minute you drive into Northampton, they have this big Black Lives Matter sign.
They do.
And I'm like, yeah, right, you know
I
this,
know,
yeah,
man.
right, from me. And I'm
Yes.
like, oh, yay, like, haven't felt safe since I left 128. You know, like, once we got outside of Worcester, right, we were sort of just driving straight, but now we can breathe, right? Like, if something happens in Northampton, folks aren't just going to assume it was me. Right? Or I may have a fighting chance. You know, and those things are really, you know, really important, you know, to know that. So wait, did you ask a question? I just got
I
lost
didn't
in
know.
Northampton.
We were still on
I'm like, oh, Northampton.
We were still on New England Nice.
Oh,
But
right,
the
New England.
Right.
Oh, right. So, you know, this is what I was going to
Yes.
say. I do think that New England is a very WASP culture. And I think that it naturally then tends to be more subdued, more of a stiff upper lip sort of attitude that you don't necessarily see in the mid-Atlantic, right? Like New York and New Jersey don't, right? Like there are places where people are more blunt. Now in the South, I mean, you know, they'll tell you, go, bless your heart.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, you hate me. Oh, okay, now I get it. Right, and I think we do have a politeness like that about us in New England.
Yes, I find that interesting, and I know I'm sticking to this topic a little longer, just because in terms of cultural, right? Every region has its cultural norms and values and views, and then when we think about DI, that's all mixed in there. So do you think, and you know, Malia, in terms of the reason why I said, you know, being here for 5 years, I do see the difference of the New England nice and kind of the subdued, the politeness, but behind closed doors, it's very apparent and clear what the story is. And so I'm curious, in my experience in Florida, I had an individual, he was a high-level executive, HR, and we were watching the film. I don't know if anyone knows about Unlikely Friendship. It's a story, you've heard of that story? Oh, it's a great documentary, PBS documentary. They made it into a Hollywood movie, but it's not that good. But watch the documentary. Sorry,
Watch the documentary.
Sorry, but the documentary is phenomenal. And it's about the desegregation of the South in North Carolina. And what they did was they got the grand dragon of the KKK and the civil rights activist, African-American woman, and they become best friends. It's an amazing story. So I showed this video in Florida, Southwest Florida, which is a red county. And I had the white male, straight male, approach me in tears, saying, Yemisi, I am that grand dragon of the KKK. That's me. And he's crying and saying that that film stirred something in him that made him uncomfortable. And he said he wasn't willing to be that way anymore. And he became my biggest advocate in the work.
That's right.
And so what impressed me is that, first of all, he's an HR exec. Second of all, that he was honest with me by telling me I am that person.
That's right.
And I want to be different.
That's right.
Can that happen here? Have you seen that type of transformation here?
So, that's a powerful question. Yes. On an individual basis, sure, right? Like, I do think that people have had a deep understanding of how they might be showing up, how they might be a part of the problem. Now, part of the problem that I think we have here is not only are we a polite WASP niceness within the white community, but we are within the Black community as well. And one of the things that I forgot about until I started traveling, and got my national on again, was how beautiful it is to go to a place that has a Black left, a true left, and what that does for the other side, right? I think that we sometimes here in Boston are also eager to get along. And I think we're also eager to not upset the apple cart. And so we end up giving white folks a lot more credit than they deserve. And I think if you're given more credit than you deserve, you have no motivation to self-reflect. Right? So I think there are very few white leaders here in Boston who would watch that story and see themselves at all in that white man. Although, I think if you were to look at the two, right, like they probably should. But I don't think we actually give them that chance. Because I think we like to go along to get along as well. So, you know, there's a lot of times, I mean, I've had people say to me like, damn, you just talk to white people like that. And it's funny to me now I come from an island and I come from a place where, you know, Hawaii, like the last day of school is called Kill Howley Day, and there was a time where all the white kids got beat up. So like I come from a place that has a different power dynamic. But there is, docile might be too hard of a word, but there is a flexibility, I think, that then will make it hard for white folks to really be held accountable. You know, when you're in New York, when you're in DC, when you're in Florida, I mean, you know, in Florida you have Black Voters Matter, right? I mean, like you have folks who are going to hold these white folks accountable. I don't know who we have like that here.
That's a deep discussion that I think needs further exploring.
At the next Focus Forum.
Yes.
In non-mixed company.
I think that needs deeper discussion.
Exactly.
But in
Blackout Juneteenth conversation.
Yes. But in going into, you know, that I implore all of you to watch that. It's a very touching documentary. Especially he realized, why did I hate Black people? Why did I hate Jews? He's like reflecting on himself, and they look like an old married couple. They're like holding each other and touching each other, and they're you know, embracing each other.
Well, and because that is natural.
Right.
Right? The hate that he had and the fear and trauma that she has is the unnatural part of their relationship. Right? The natural part of all of our relationships is to evolve together. Right? And so, you know, it really is unfortunate that we've gotten to a place where, you know, an interracial friendship is the inspiration, and it is.
It is.
Right? And that's what's unfortunate, especially the way we pat ourselves on the back.
That's a great point, and that leads to my next question. You know, In the Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, she discusses the impact that racism has had on all of us, right? Especially when we're speaking about policy, laws, economy. She states that the benefits we gain when people come together across race to accomplish what we simply can't do on our own. So why do you think this idea and concept is so hard for people to understand?
So first out, shout out to Heather McGhee.
Yes.
Love her. You know, in my book, I talk about our narrative, right? And you will kill for your narrative, right? I mean, we do. We go to war for lines drawn, right? Bloody lines drawn, right? I mean, we're talking about closing the Black wealth gap with stolen land, right? I mean, so much of it we even take for granted, right? And so it becomes hard then to deconstruct capitalism or deconstruct racism when our capitalism is color-coded. And I think, you know, it's not that we don't know it. It's that what happens to me when I admit it, right? So a lot of the times when I'm talking to a white guy, straight white guy, middle manager, right, who wants to be honest with me, he'll say, I've worked really hard. I've missed my daughter's birthdays, right? I've given to this company. I've competed against all the people. And now you're telling me I have not competed against all the people and that the goalpost is changing. Well, how am I not to be mad, right? There's a quote in the book actually from Archie Bunker, and the quote is, why would a man be for equality? What's the sense of working hard all your life just to wind up equal? Right? And that's the narrative. Right? That's actually the narrative that makes it hard for me to believe that I somehow got here on privilege. There was a study done where people were playing Monopoly, and they told a couple of people, like, we're going to cheat for you. Like, so we are cheating on your behalf in this Monopoly game. And the person was like, okay, cool. And then the person won the Monopoly game. And when they were interviewed, they said, oh, I know you were cheating, but I actually think it was because I made that move on da-da-da, right? So even when you're told that your people are cheating on your behalf, you're like, but I'm still kind of genius though, right? Like I still was a part of this.
Right.
And that's why, right? It's embedded in our culture, right? It is our standard of beauty, right? It is our standard of intelligence. It is our basic standards of normativity. And so not only are the people who work so hard for this bought in, and the idea that someone wouldn't want a straight life with a white picket fence, right? Well, why? I mean, that's what we all want, right? Like, so we're just doing it. It's unimaginable for them. And I think for a lot of them who have scarcity mentality, right? A lot of them who have a very individualistic mindset anyway, it's really hard to then change that, right? And so, Heather talks about it, I talk about it in the book, Frederick Douglass, I quote Frederick Douglass, who talks about his mistress, when he was first a slave, like, his mistress would teach him how to read. Like, that's how he first learned, and that's how he got his first words, right? And how he knew he loved words. And then as more slaves were coming in, it was like, okay, lock down your slaves because they're going to be revolts, right? Like, we start getting harsher on this. And he talked about how she became physically different, right? How her body started to deteriorate, how she wasn't smiling anymore, right? How she became ugly, how she drank, her husband drank, right? How there became a sadness in the house because you have to dehumanize yourself to treat other people that way. And, all I have to look at is Sandy Hook. And, when Sandy Hook happened, I was like, oh, thank God we're going to get gun reform. Like, these are babies being shot. Yeah. But if you can shoot my child, that's really not that far from then you shooting your own, right? Like, and so this idea that our violence to one somehow won't backsplash and become our violence in society is quixotic. I also thought, when a certain gentleman said that he just grabs him by the pee, that we weren't going to see any ladies vote either, right? So I have a lot to learn, even in my even as we continue, growing. But that, I think we need to recognize that we none of us are living our best lives because some of our lives have no value in this country.
Thank you for that. And there's a follow-up audience question to that. In respect to impact, what role can white allies play?
So white allies have a really important role. And this is where I'm going to go 3 L's, please. And there'll be a slide that will come up there in a second. Bam. So this is one of the things that I talk about in the book. But the important role that allies play, I think, is twofold. One, is modeling behavior, right? And I talk a lot about some really kick-ass allies in this book. One is Mrs. Schwimmer, who was the wife of the Goodwin Cheney Schwimmer murders. And she was a white woman, and so of course the news was on her, right? And she kept on saying, you're only talking to me because I'm white. There have been black men missing like forever. Let's find all the bodies. And she has this great quote in an interview where she says, I knew what they wanted was a white woman falling apart. And I knew that that could not be the story of the civil rights movement, right? And so at this time where her husband, right, was drowned in a lake, right, where she had every excuse to be the victim, she was like, I'm not the most victimized in this story right now. But because you have a microphone in front of me, I'm going to talk about the black Mississippians that have been missing that y'all ain't sent a search party for yet. And that is allyship. Being a decent white person is not allyship. And that's, I think it's really, really important to remember. So I talk about the 3 L's here, and it's listen, learn, and take loving action. And so the first thing is to listen, right? Like, shh. Again, shout out to my mom if your mouth is opening. And she said this one a lot to me. You can't be listening because you're talking, you know. But it's so shut up, right? Your answers don't belong here. Whatever answers, whatever genius, because you're so smart, Ivy League, great. Shh. You have nothing to bring here yet. You don't know enough. Anything that comes out of your mouth is uninformed action. It's going to be painful. It's going to hurt. So just shh. Then once you've listened to the voices, right? Then you go into the community and you learn about the underlying problems and the agendas that they are working on now. If you want to know what black people need, there are 400 years of black people telling you. You don't need to guess it. You don't even need to do a modern day survey because half those laws weren't passed 400 years ago, right? Like, we're still fighting for them now, right? If you want to know what women need, you have 400 years of American women talking about what they need. Things like they don't want to get burned at the stake, you know, some basic stuff, right? If you want to know what people with disabilities need, they've been screaming it from the mountaintops for the last 40 years, right? So you can go in and learn from them, and then you don't just take action, which so many people want to do. Oh, let me sign a pledge, let me do a thing. You take loving action. We've all been given a gift that lets you know you don't really know me that well. You know what I mean? Where you're like, oh, a pen. Lovely, right? It's not a loving gift. Like you know, someone said, come to Malia's birthday party. You needed to pick something up, right? It's a cute Hello Kitty pen. You bought it for me 5 things. Right? You know, like loving action is something that I have been asking for. Right? So the example of where this all fell apart during George Floyd and why, you know, some of us are not shocked that there's a retrenchment. Most of us thought we had about 2 or 3 years, right? We knew we had about 2 or 3 years to make change, and that most of it was BS, right? Is the Juneteenth holiday, right? So I go to a lot of black meetings. I see some folks here who go to the same black meetings. We weren't talking about Juneteenth holiday. We were talking about the George Floyd Police Reform Bill, which was called the Michael Brown Police Reform Bill, which was called, you know, all the way back to Oscar Grant Police, right? Like, that's what we were asking for. We were not asking for a day off. And we sure as hell weren't asking for Walmart to make some red velvet ice cream, right? We were asking for a bill that will stop police from willy-nilly killing us for no reason. And we got a holiday. So now celebrate your holiday, you know, get your 15% off your mattresses or whatever is going to start happening on that day. But know that it in no way makes up for the police brutality and police lynchings that happen with people, right? So when we talk about being an ally, it's not enough to just be nice to black people or maybe even, you know, think you're an interrupter because every once in a while you say something. It's that you're actually supporting the actions, the message, and the missions of the people you want to be in right relationship with, right? So as an able-bodied and being told mentally stable person, if I want to be an ally to the disability community, my job is to not put lights around curbs, right? My job right now is actually to pull for lifestyle accessibility, right? This is what people with disabilities are asking us for now. They're not just asking for ramps, they're asking for us to see their humanity, their sexuality, their orgasms, right? That's what they're asking for now. So if I actually want to help people with disabilities, that's the work I want to be doing, right? Now, I may feel more comfortable helping someone get up a curb cut, right? Because I might feel uncomfortable talking, around people with disabilities and sex, and right. I may feel uncomfortable because of my ableism, but that's my problem, not theirs. And so, if you're a fair weather ally, then you're not an ally. You're a decent person, and thank you, and continue to do that. But the word ally and the word organizer are two sacred words to me. Sacred. And I would say that, this country, if we have a good 1,000 allies countrywide, I might be being generous. It's a word that has been really diluted, I think, to mean a decent person, right? But, just because you don't get mad that there's an all-gender bathroom does not mean you are an ally to the community.
This is good. Now, I'm curious, as we just talked about allyship, and isn't there another word that they started tossing around?
Co-conspirator, right? There was a bunch of different...
It was something else that I can't seem to remember, but I've seen there's different, to your point, the different layers of allyship, but truly is being a disruptor and really impacting policy, practices, procedures. That's what I'm hearing from what you just stated. And so in your white paper titled Future Proofing, which you can get
at thelazugroup.com.
There you go. You mentioned the concept of pushback. So we talked about it on the top of the meeting, but I wanted to highlight your article and its relationship to bias. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this means and how it ties into our conversation today?
Okay, wait, so repeat the first part.
Okay, in your white paper titled Future Proofing, you mentioned the concept of pushback, and we talked about it earlier, but in your article, you go deeper into it, and you talk about bias, like you mentioned earlier today. Can you talk a little bit more about what it means and how it ties into our conversation today? How can we future-proof our organization?
Yes. So future-proofing is, what every business is looking at doing, right? You got to future-proof your company. The inventor of the icebox was not the inventor of the refrigerator, right? Because it's hard to strike gold twice, right? It's hard to get lightning in a bottle twice. And oftentimes you're so busy protecting the icebox that you didn't notice the dude doing the refrigerator, right? Next door, and you're trying to get policy passed for iceboxes. And everyone's like, or we could just go to refrigerator, right? That's what you want your company to do. You don't want your company writing policy to protect iceboxes. Not if you want to compete in the 21st century. And again, just like I talked about earlier, right, that our freedom is not inevitable because it's not our habits. Neither is the success of your company or the American economy. And so, right now, and especially in this state, we have some great recession-proof industries. We can feel good about things. But the reason why companies are caught flat-footed so often is because they actually don't know how to see the pushback as accountability, right? So when I'm working with my clients, and I was just working with a client who got a call from Color of Change because they did something, so Color of Change is like boop boop bop boop 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 bop. Hey, we're about to come for y'all, and and so they call me, right, and they're like, And their first thing is to, be like, why can't they just go do something else? And it's like, because you haven't gotten this right. And if you notice, they bolded your mission because they align with your mission. You're not aligning with your mission. Right? So rather than getting mad because they're holding you accountable, why don't you be open and go and meet with them and say, this is what we're trying to do. Now, how can we get closer to how you would like to see us? Right? I mean, and, when I first became bank president, I told the CEO, I'm unconvinced at American capitalism. And he said to me, that's okay. We have more capitalists in the bank. I think we'll be okay. But the reason why he let me in after saying that was because he knew that we would not be able to introduce the products, and no banks in Boston have yet introduced the products that we've introduced, if he had a capitalist in that role. Right? Like, if he wanted innovation, what he actually needed was someone who didn't believe the hype. Right? And then I was able to then figure out how we would do zero consideration loans. Right? Like, no collateral, no credit score, working with the FDIC to figure out how to do that. Right? So, this idea of wanting to ignore or, wanting to be polite, nice towards the pushback, it's just short-sighted. Like, talk to your therapist, put on your big girl pants. You're a CEO, you're a straight white man, you're probably doing fine. Help your company move forward.
Great point. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit. You've been doing this work for a long time, over 20 years, right?
Started when I was 5.
Yes, you do. You don't look a day over 25.
Right, remember, because we were in elementary together.
That is right. And I want to share, I had a friend of mine who did a study and said, people who do this work, DEI work, they get burned out, right? And it was equated to people in the NFL. So, in the NFL, you can't play for 20 years. What is it, like
right.
15,
That's right.
maybe 15, 10 tops, because of the amount of abuse on the body. So she equated it to the psychological abuse that impacts people in this work. And so basically, you should have been retired. I should be retired. What do you say for people out there that are trying to do the good fight and it's getting challenging? You see bright lights and then you see a dark tunnel and you just feel kind of deflated. What do you say to those out there who are continuing to work, who've been doing it a long time, but they're tired?
Absolutely. So, I first laugh, right? Because coming from an organizer to then being in corporate America, I'm not sleeping on dirt floors trying to organize in Milwaukee, right? I mean, so for me, I was like, oh, shoot, money, right? So, I occasionally wipe my tears with that sometimes. And I think it's important to keep that in context, right? Because we are doing corporate change. And there are folks who are actually out in the streets, right? Who are getting daily death threats, right? Who are seeing the children who are committing suicide because they can't find books that reflect their voices, right? Who are really at the first response. And so coming from organizing and being a burnt out organizer, I think I came to this understanding that we do have a privilege here. And we want to lean into that, right? We are in the house. And it's a different trajectory to throw rocks. And I know that because I used to throw them from outside. And when you get inside, you can't throw them the same way as you do when you're outside, And so, but I think that is important for us to keep in perspective. I'll work with employees and, they'll be all fired up and we need to do this and do that. And I'm like, well, we could make all these changes if y'all want to walk out tomorrow. But no one wants to walk out, right? I mean, we all got 529s and, and mortgage payments and boat payments, right? We're not going to totally unionize. We just want some respect, right? So we also need to keep that in, we need to keep that in context too. Now, all that being said, this is horribly emotionally hard, contrasting work, right? This work has you staying in the contract for the work. And so it becomes incredibly important to have things outside of that that affirm your humanity, right? That don't have you believing that BS, right? That have you forgetting about your Black girl magic, right? And I'm talking to you personally, right? Like,
Thank you.
you know, like that have you believing this stuff. And so I do therapy. I have a very strong spiritual practice that I take very seriously. You know, like Justice, my assistant will tell you, right? Like there are some times where you're just not going to get me. And that's because I need to protect and reaffirm my humanity. And what I also have is I have an amazing social network of people that affirm my humanity. And so when something happens and I need to talk to one of my friends, you know, whatever color they are, they're not going to come off and say, well, do you think she meant to do that? Do you think that that's how it really should have happened? They're going to be like, that's some racist, sexist BS, right? They're going to affirm it. And then I'm going to be like, ain't it? So this is the process, and I'll throw this process out to you all. The first thing I do is I reach out to someone to talk smack. So I'll text one of my friends, oh my God, such and such a company is doing it again, blah, 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 blah. And then they respond back, right? That's such bullshit. I always knew they were, right? Like, you know, they have my back and they respond. And then in that evening, if I have more to say about it, we talk again that night. And what that lets me do is that lets me get out the frustration, and it also affirms my humanity, right? And that allows me then to move on from the initial reaction, right? And then get to the strategy of, okay, how am I going to get this management committee to actually move on this, right? And you know that process, having that process is really important. And so, you know, this work is burnout work. If you don't feed yourself, and if we don't also keep it in context, you know, one of the things that I'm struggling with right now, and I hope a lot of us are struggling with right now, is what to do, how to live through a Jim Crow era. I never thought I would have to. I heard stories, you know, my father and, you know, and I've heard stories, but I've, you know, even my mother, right? But I've never had to think about how to do that. And I started getting really burnt out, right? I started being like, oh my God, we have to fight this, da 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 da. And then I don't know if it was like the ancestors, you know, was like downstream, baby. And I realized that I actually don't have to save every Black person in America. I don't have to save every woman in America. And as a matter of fact, most of them don't, or, you know, if they don't want to be saved, they don't have to be, right? If Harriet Tubman didn't have a waiting list for the Underground Railroad, I sure as hell am not going to have one, right? But what I can do is create community that I want to create. And maybe it is outside of this country, right? Or maybe it is in this country. But rather than looking at fighting back an empire when I'm not even a huge believer in nation states, versus what are we building to replace American fascism, that also helps me. So I think, you know, thinking about, are you fighting or are you building, right? And there are times where, you know, I will let things go. I mean, I don't know if folks saw MIT, you know, drop their commitments, right? First elite institution to do it. I sent around a couple of emails. I saw I was the only one worked up. So I moved on from it, right? Because I'm not going to fight every fight. But I'm also going to be, I'm also going to make sure that I'm, as much as possible, surrounding myself with love and surrounding myself with empathy and compassion. because so often the work I do, as you said, and the work you do, I mean, we're convincing people to include us. It's like hard to not get mad. When people are like, well, I don't know, we have budgets, and you're like, but it's a human being, and I'm right here. I know, well, I mean, we just don't know. No, I do though. Ask me. All right, and now with the pushback to DEI, I mean, I've been in rooms, where Black people are looking at me saying, do we need to cross out the term Black? And I'm like, do you have a lawsuit? Because I know you know what I mean? Like, my father always said to me, you got to be a reluctant victim, right? Like, you're not, like, I'm not going to cross out the word Black, right? Like, I mean, you're going to have to force me to cross out Black, right? But, so, we get so caught up in that it becomes, okay, how do we just, get through? And I hope that rather than receiving the microaggressions and receiving the macroaggressions, that we also use our magic and our resilience and our perseverance and all those things that are unfair that we have to use so much for building what's next.
Well, that leads me to my final question about what's next.
Buy my book.
Yes, buy her book, and definitely buy her book. And on this topic, I didn't want it to end on, all doom and gloom. And you kind of gave some highlights. I want to know right now, what's giving you hope, even in this current landscape?
If I could tell, oh my gosh, if I hit the lottery, my nieces will be getting very irritated because I will just be trying to hang out with them and get on their energy. Young people, as always,
Yes.
Young people are fluid. They are, and I mean race, gender, I mean in every way, job, capital, in traveling, when I was in Miami actually for my book talk, there was this great moment of this older person, and in Miami, everyone just wants to talk politics, right? Which I try not to talk about in my book because way more people buy Starbucks than vote, so companies shouldn't care about voters. They should care about employees and consumers, but that's a whole nother story. And so this woman, was like, well, these young people today, and I get it. I don't get mumble rap either. I get it. We're old. But there was this young person and he was like, I would like to speak to that. And I would like to tell you all what we feel and how we're feeling now. And it ended up being this really beautiful, beautiful conversation. But, one of the things that he articulated so powerfully is that we have left them a worse mess than we were left. And that they are responding to all the things. And that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because they're getting the baton, right? I mean, that's just time. Time's just gonna make it that so. And so, they're moving on. And they don't see the legitimacy in institution, right? I mean, most of these folks watch their parents work all their lives to lose their house in 2008, right? They don't buy it. And listen, we didn't really buy it either, right? We just bought into it now. So, now we're like, well, no, of course you just need to get a mortgage. We didn't really buy into it either. So it's, what gives me hope is that I think that these young people, and it might be a Trotsky moment, y'all. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is it might be a burn down moment, right? It might be we're not going back to work. So what? What you gonna do now? It might be that, but God damn it, we have to let them do that because they need to stop this train. And I know we don't want this train to stop because we're in it. And if it stops too quickly, our contents are going to get jarbled as well. But we're going to be dead and buried when these kids are, figuring out how to actually clean this up. And they know it. They're up for the challenge. They're ready for the fight. They want that smoke. I mean, it's what gives me hope. Shout out to all the moms and dads and parents and, folks out there,
Yes.
because these kids have been raised to believe what was said. And, so now they're looking around and like, well, no, you told me I could, be anything.
Right.
You told me this and that. And I don't even have clean air and water. Y'all lied about everything. And now you want me to behave and vote for some old white guy? And you're mad at me that I don't want to? Get out of here. And we should. And again, go vote. It's important. Vote for whatever old white guy you want. But we have to understand why they're kind of done with it all. And maybe support their vision forward. Again, listen, learn, take loving action, right? Rather than being like, fine, you can come into the office 3 days a week. Why don't we say, hey, you know what? I hated paying my dues. Let's figure out a way that we don't have to do that, right? Let's figure out equity on that level. The more we make labor human, the more we all become human in labor. And these babies, the young people, that's what's giving me hope.
That's what's giving you hope. Well, that was concluding my last question. Do we take any audience or? Yes.
Thank you so
Is there
much.
Any audience? Oh, there we go.
I'm not asking, I'm just volunteering to give the microphone.
Oh, okay. I was like, you got up there quick, sir.
And anyone from the Zoom as well.
Yeah.
Questions? Thank you, sir.
When you talked earlier about pushback, you talked about the roots of pushback being racism and sexism, homophobia. I would think that any company that's going down the DEA path would anticipate that. So what can you tell them about fighting attitudes of racism and sexism, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question because they actually don't anticipate it. A lot of CEOs and managers are used to people listening to them, right? They're used to people saying like, oh my God, that's so funny. Oh my God, that's genius, right? Whatever it might be. And so all of a sudden, someone comes up to you and says like, are you really doing this thing? Are we really going to be, concentrating on hiring the ladies? And it's almost like a personal affront, So like what I see a lot is folks feeling like they're being questioned in the tribe, right? Like, well, what is your actual commitment to us? If you're willing to look at this over here, and we talked about a narrative earlier. That's really where the narrative then becomes the pushback, right? Like there's that quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I've seen the best strategies just get eaten up by this culture. So, when pushback happens, that's why in the book, I talk about the 3 stages of pushback, like just really breaking it down so that you can understand when you decide to either move through the pushback or when you decide to let the pushback win. Either or, right? I mean, I think every day sometimes we make different decisions on those things, but I do really try to prepare for the pushback. But what I'm often told is we're not racist. We're not sexist. We're not homophobic, right? So, maybe a few fringe folks won't like it, but, we're good people here, right? And then all of a sudden, well, now I don't know what bathroom to use because it's all gent, right? Like, and you're like, but I thought we were all nice people here, right? And so I think people give themselves a lot more credit on how open they are. And then once you actually get started in it, it becomes uncomfortable because it's your friends, right? It's very rarely the people who are excluded saying, why are you doing that, right? Like quick story, when I was first hired at the bank, there was folks who would come up to the CEO of the company and say, and these were like, the more white business folks, right? And so like, oh, wow, you took a chance on Malia, right? Because I'm seen as an activist. But whenever he was in the black community or, the brown community, they'd be like, oh my God, you got a coup, right? Like, how'd you get Malia to come into the bank, right? And he finally started laughing and was like, right, like you make white businessmen uncomfortable, but the black people love you, right? And that's what I need in the bank, right? And so it is hard when it's your own people. And I think that's really, that's what makes getting through the pushback hard. Barbara Clark, I talk about in my book, she's this investor. And she's this amazing woman investor, supports only women, has a beautiful portfolio. And she'll bring men in to, jump in on her investments. And all of a sudden they'll start asking questions that she's never heard them ask men before, right? And she looks at them and she says, just write the damn check, right? Like, this woman is bringing you twice as much of the answers as this last guy that was just in here pitching us, write the damn check. And it's hard to do that if you're not in a position of power, right? She's an investor where, she's writing for millions, they're writing for millions. I think in the job, it becomes more difficult.
Thank you. A question just occurred to me.
We have a question back here, and then we have a question up front.
Yes.
Okay. A question occurred to me about educational materials. You had mentioned this documentary that was so moving.
Yeah.
I had worked for a cross-cultural consulting firm, and we were showing web tools that really simplified cultural exchange. So when you go to Japan, you bow like this. When you go to the Middle East, you shouldn't show the soles of your feet. I'm trying to equate that to the U.S. context, that we don't really have tools to understand each other or tools that are widely dispersed. So I really loved your example about the documentary, and I'll look it up. But Malia, what have you come across, like in a corporate context? Are there just these bizarre, tools that are just checking the box? Or is there anything that's quality being produced that really moves the needle and makes people feel and makes people empathize and get it?
Yes, thank you. So, I think, especially now with podcasts, there's so much, thinking about the 3 L's, there's so much content out there that you can go out and you can learn, and, learn again from different people's viewpoints, right? So, right now, I'm actually following a bunch of different Middle East American Jewish and Arab podcasts, trying to understand that internal conversation, because I just have my American lens of it, right? And so, I love podcasts. I think podcasts are great. We also have some great digital tools at lazugroup.com that you can check out. I do think it's so important, and I think, getting back to this idea of what is normal, we in America like to think that, well, we're all alike, and we are, right? At the end of the day, grab a Black, a Latino, and a white American and put them somewhere, and people will be like, American, right? I'm hardly Black when I go to Africa, right? Right, sis? You can tell me, right? I know. I got to South Africa, they're like, you're colored at the very best. If you get some color, maybe we'll put you in the color category, right? So, this idea of that, well, we're all probably the same, and that is true to a certain extent, but we do have different cultural norms, and I think understanding that and admitting that to yourself and seeing that as a benefit, and again, getting beyond holidays and food and grandparents, right? I call my auntie too, right? Getting beyond stuff like that, but really understanding what it means to be Black in this country, right? What it means to be Latino in this country. And if you want to understand what it means to be Latino in this country, then you don't go by Latino, and you actually want to know what it means to be a Puerto Rican, a Cuban, a Dominican, right? And understanding those nuances through education, I think, can really help. It's and it's also what made the Juneteenth holiday hard when it was put out. Because that holiday, and some of you in here know, I mean, we were throwing the dopest Juneteenth party at the Museum of Fine Arts for years, right? I mean, 5,000 people coming out to it. But it was a sacred holiday for us, right? It was something that like we did to mark something. We don't even all agree on the story, right? Like not, I mean, there'd be like Mel Miller, shout out to Mr. Miller. He's like, no white man rode up on a horse and told us we were free, right? So we don't even fully agree on the story of it. But what we knew was that we were free, right? We agreed on that part of it. And, to see it now become whitewashed in the way it's going to be whitewashed, I think is going to be hard, and it's what makes that education stuff, that you were talking about, Shannon, so important.
I think that's a great question. And of course, going on to her website for tools, and one of the tools that I've used for a number of years, but I'm learning about your tools, is the dignity model. And it's a tool that we introduced to GBH recently. And it's a long topic around it, but I can share. I used it for the first time in this part in New England after George Floyd. And the dignity model really talks about the difference between respect and dignity. Respect, when you look it up in the dictionary, it's performative. I need to do something or have degrees or have money or live in a certain area to get your respect. Dignity, as she mentioned, is humanity, right? For the sheer essence of me being a human being, I deserve dignity.
That's right.
Right? And that's a lot of what you were talking about, regardless of who I love or what I look like, my age, my shade, I deserve to be treated with dignity. And so there is a whole concept around that in terms of how to address things that are very challenging and difficult, especially conflictual conversation.
That's right.
And during George Floyd, I used that document, and I remember the manager, and it has these essential elements, and an employee said, put up Black Lives Matter, and we are not allowed to put any signs up in the building. And she said, I put it up for you to notice. And he went and complained about it, and it came to me, and he said, I said to him, well, she said, I put it up for you to notice. What did she mean by that? He's like, I don't know. I didn't have the chance to ask her. And I said, okay, this employee, tell me more about her. He said, oh, she was my best employee. She was amazing. She was this, that. I hired her. And I said, what happened post George Floyd? She started coming in late. She started being kind of withdrawn. And I said, did you talk to her? He said, no, I'm just a white guy from Pittsfield. I never had the conversation. I don't feel comfortable to have these kind of conversations. And that's when I gave him the dignity model, and it showed certain steps. And he recognized she just wanted acknowledgement.
That's it.
She was Afro-Latina. She just wanted acknowledgement. And he said because he was afraid, he didn't acknowledge the impact that it had.
That's right.
But he didn't have the tools, right? Now I gave him the tools. He goes and have the conversation with her. She puts down the sign, and he said, Yemisi, this was the most inspiring conversation I ever had in my life, particularly about race. And then he became the educator, right? Because for him, as a straight white male, it was important for him. He realized that he had this aha moment that he needed to spread that. But to your point, he didn't have the tools.
That's
and
right.
so it's important, like books like Malia Lazu
or
and
the
other,
fortitude.
yes,
It's you don't have to talk about it when you're a white man, right? And so you can choose, and so it's important to recognize that that it takes a certain kind of person, and most people would just like to push this off into charity.
Right.
And not actually keep it in their business, and so when you see that, that's really important.
It is really important. And so I know.
And Gail, you had a question?
Yes.
Thank you. Actually, I've been really enjoying this conversation, and the question that the woman asked back here was somewhat similar. But Yemisi, the work that you do and the DEI work is very, very difficult, very challenging. And in your role, Malia, as someone who consults with companies and you help, they contact you for your expertise, what are some of how do you get started with companies? For example, do you kind of go in, like there's different models, do you go in and you do an assessment? Do you kind of listen to what the company has to say about some of the challenges that they're having? And how do you make them recognize that this is not just a short-term situation here, that this is an investment that you have to make into your company, into your business, and it's also something that's it's like diversity and inclusion is not something that it's put into HR as a side piece, but it also has to do with making it something an imperative from the CEO's perspective of the company. And so, what tools do you use to ensure that this is something that's lasting in an organization beyond?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yes,
So
great question.
there's a couple of tools, and we talk about them in the book actually. But the first is we do something called a discovery groups, and it's appreciative inquiry, positive psychology approach to talking to employees. And what that lets us do is have an honest, authentic assessment about what's going on. And like one of the questions we ask is like, beyond pay, why do you stay? Right? And we ask these questions to really try to, get into what is the culture? How is a culture curious? How is a culture empathetic, right? How does that actually show up for folks? And what that allows us to do is to actually have their own employees' words reflected back at them, right? So, a lot of times in employee surveys, people know how to take the test. Right. And, I was working with this one company that, very much known for DEI. And so when you looked at their employee survey, the top two things were diversity and inclusion. And the bottom two things were teamwork and welcoming. And I thought to myself, well, that
Yes.
you do DEI, but you don't do DEI. And I'm sorry that someone lied to you and told you that you did it. So being able to pull out the contradictions, I don't come out with a checklist. Like I kind of come out and I put them on roller skates right away, because if they're uncomfortable, I can do work, right? This is where I become what's his name? Dog whisperer, Caesar Milan.
Oh, see,
Right. I'm best when you misbehave in front of me. Right, because then I can correct behavior.
yeah.
Because most people around you are going to be like, oh, no, but I know you're a really nice guy. I don't know why they're so mad that you said that in the letter, right? Like most people,
Yes.
and I'm like, I know why they were mad, because that was ignorant, right? Like that's why they were mad. And so, I bring them out. I mean, every single one, actually, except for one, every single one of my CEOs has done a walk with me, whether that be in their state or, and the exec ed class that I just got approved is all happening in Roxbury. We're going from MIT to Roxbury to see what Richard Taylor and others are doing, right? Because as long as they're in a boardroom or they're in their corner office, they're comfortable. They know how to act. And I'm not going to be able to get them to take that mask off, so I actually have to get them out. So those are some things we do. Another thing we do that we talk about in the book is we do bearing witness exercises. And those of you who are familiar with bearing witness exercises, they're about bearing witness, right? They're about acknowledging, but not about fixing per se. And that's really hard for executives to do, because they'll hear from their employees, this and this happened to me, and because of it, I'm making $70,000 less than my counterpart, and I think about that every day when I found out that amount. And immediately the person wants to be like, okay, wait, who's your supervisor? I'm going to make sure that you have that. But no, right? Because it's actually the system, right? You don't get to fix Susie and then think you fixed it, right? You got to fix the system and then think you fixed it. So doing a bearing witness exercise, and it can take me a minute. I mean, I have a company that it took me 2 years before they let me talk to any of their Black employees. a Boston-based company. It took 2 years before they let me talk to their employees. So, it's I think for me, I come at it as we're not doing check the box. We're not doing this and that. We're actually going to sit in your we're going to get you uncomfortable. We're going to see what comes out. And then we're going to deal with whatever you throw up on the floor. It's an unconventional approach, but you would expect nothing less, right, Gail?
Not from you.
No, I mean I can't. What are we here for? If I'm just gonna make you feel good about yourself, I need to get paid a lot more than.
Oh my gosh. Well, I loved this conversation so much. Thank you for your great questions. Thank you so much, Malia, for an illuminating discussion. If you could give her a round of applause. I hope that people leave with action steps. I hope that people leave with her book. And
I'll be signing.
And she'll be signing it. Yes, she'll be signing.
And it's Frugal Bookstore, Black Bookstore, 15% off.
Yes, 15% off. And, the impact that it can make within their own spaces. That is why we have discussions like this, because it's about the impact you can make within your own spaces. And there is a quote that I like, and I hope you like this. You don't get harmony if everyone sings the same note. So perhaps one day we can all value and appreciate the different notes that we bring. And when we do, there will be harmony.
Oh, I like that.
So thank you for being with us tonight. Please join Malia Lazu in the atrium for a signed book. Good night, everyone. Thank you, and thank you those in the room, and thank you those in the Zoom. Have a good night.
Thank you.